carla.zuniga@actuaries.org. So, now, the first poll question to have an idea about the actuarial roles of our attendees is, what is your current actuarial role? You have 30 seconds to answer. I don't think that this is the right polling question.
Carla, can you give us the different polling question?
Yes, this is the one. So 30 seconds from now.
I'm waiting to see the answers. Here we go. We have, out of 141 people participating, we have 61 people saying that they are the employee. We have 13 who are consultants, and we have a small number, a couple who are academics. 3 of you are employees of an insurance supervisor, and 9 of you have another role. We haven't had an answer from 53 altogether. So it's quite clear that nearly half are employees with a scattering of other roles. So thank you for participating, and we'll use this polling approach a number of times later in the seminar. So back to you, Vladimir, for the next section.
Thank you, David. Dear attendees, our agenda of today has 2 parts. The first part, I will present the reserving case study that was made available to you before the webinar. This case was selected amongst the responses to a survey asking our regional actuarial associations for bottleneck scenarios. Having in mind that non-life insurance with motor insurance as the most important line of business is dominant in this region, a case study that involves a non-life reserving actuary has been selected. In the second part, we discuss questions pertaining to this case study, and when appropriate, a poll question will pop up on your screen, so please make sure that you answer those. Reserving case study is a typical scenario for many actuaries in emerging and developing countries. Assume you're the appointed actuary required to make a yearly evaluation of the technical provisions, taking into consideration the solvency framework and in accordance with the prevailing actuarial standards. Although the regime is standard across the industry, the regulations allow to select the reserving methods. You're fully aware that the selected reserving methodology is crucial for the final figures in the annual financial report. It is also a key aspect in the assessment of the credibility of the company. Incurred claims, or the paid claims plus the variations in technical reserves, including the IBNR, which stands for incurred but not reported claims, impact also the yearly accounting result of the company. You have submitted your draft report on the evaluation of the technical provisions to the management board, or senior management in other jurisdictions, chaired by the Chief Executive Officer. The finance director, or the CFO, approaches you before the meeting begins. The proposed increase in technical provisions implies that the company's annual result will be below the budget estimates presented to the board. The shareholders will not be satisfied with the results. The finance director suggests that you present the draft report to the board, indicating that the reserve level is a worst-case scenario. He also tells you that you should propose a 20% lower best estimate liability. This will decrease the incurred claims in the profit and loss account, immediately increase the yearly result of the company, and make the shareholders happy. The finance director strongly emphasizes that your experienced predecessor explained to him that actuarial reserving is not an exact science, but the actuary uses his judgment to a great extent, and that the result is subjective. Furthermore, he says that he is aware that the actuary sets the reserve slightly above the midpoint of an implicit range of values, and the actuary should be comfortable with any figure in that range. Here I end the presentation of this case study, and we will start our reflections, discussions, and further polling. Here comes the second polling question. Have you ever been in a similar situation? You have 30 seconds to answer.
Right, I've now got the answers to the polling question. Then we have 43 out of 148 who say yes. 55 have said no, and we haven't any answer from the other 50. So of those people that have answered either yes or no, just under half have been in this situation. So clearly it's something which is of interest and concern to us all. So I think with that background, back to you, Vladimir.
Yes, well, I believe that some actuaries from our region may think that this situation is quite common and that it isn't, they wouldn't call it rocket science. However, the question is, if it is common in our region and exceptional in the developed markets, are we as actuaries treating it professionally, or are we just letting it go and letting it happen again to us and our colleagues? We may have good understanding in mathematics, statistics, data analysis, modeling, etc. But if we don't treat these situations professionally, can we say that we are good actuaries? There are mathematicians, statisticians around, but it is the professionalism skills in the end that distinguish a good actuary from a mathematician or statistician or data analyst.
Thank you, Vladimir. Well, clearly, that's very important. It's important that we all have all these skills that we learn at university and all the exams, but we also have an awful lot more to the role of an actuary than simply being able to do the job at the desk. And as we will discover as we move on, I've come across all sorts of examples over the years of difficulties that people have, particularly in some of the smaller countries with smaller populations and a smaller industry. So back to you, Vladimir, for the next part.
Thank you, David. So let's continue now. After all this being said, what are the choices for the actuary in such a situation? Shall he accept? Shall he stay or leave? We'll discuss several aspects and possibilities later in the presentation. How will his or her final choice impact customers? If the reserves are decreased, will customers be reimbursed on time and fairly? Then how will they impact the company employees? If the actuary accepts, the company will declare profits and the employees will likely get their bonuses. If not, there may be no bonuses and the employees may not be happy. This may be the short-term result. For the longer term, if reserves were too low, maybe this is just hiding the problem. If hidden for too long, then you increase the risk of insolvency, which could cause the employees to lose their jobs. And it's the external auditor. Will they discover the manipulations? How about the shareholders? Will they be satisfied? For a short term, maybe. If the actuary helps hide a problem that is fixable, then shareholders may find themselves making incorrect longer-term investment decisions. How about the supervisor? Will they discover the decrease? If things go bad later, will they blame the actuary as the scapegoat? and the competitors. Will the actuaries working for the competitors be put under pressure to decrease reserves if this actuary accepts? Is it going to have effect on the overall reserves in the market? The government, with the regulated prices in MTPL in most of the non-EU markets, which are part of Europe, will the positive result of the company be a reason for a government to decrease the tariffs? And in the end, it's the local actuarial association. Will it start a disciplinary procedure against this member if he or she acts under the influence of the finance director, which is in conflict with the neutrality principle stated in the Code of Conduct? The following slide includes questions related to the reserving process.
Could I just mention at this stage that as Vladimir goes through the questions here, particularly the first one and the second one, if you have any views on this and experience from what you have encountered, you can submit those ideas anonymously using the Q&A facility on the screen. And we'll have a pause after each question to see whether there are any points of view that have been raised by you that we can mention, so the rest of the audience will have the benefit of that. So please keep that in mind and use the Q&A facility to give us your views. So back to you, Vladimir.
Thanks, David. First question concerns the reserve estimate methodology. Is it clearly defined in your company's policies, or is it the actuary who decides on it? Or maybe the methodology prescribed in the regulations? Is there sufficient data history? Does the reserve estimate methodology, which clearly describes the steps, exist? Is data sufficient and of a good quality? All this should involve data adequacy verification before a model is used, several reserving models to choose from, requirements that each actuarial judgment should be well documented and explained. The second question, the actuarial judgment. To what extent can you apply actuarial judgment after you obtain the results from the reserving models? Actuarial judgment assumes that you have experience and expertise with this kind of actuarial work. You may have used models to obtain results. Once you have obtained a result, does it make sense? You had some expectations. Does the result correspond? It is important to make the non-actuarial staff aware that actuarial judgment is based on experience, is well-founded with realistic assumptions, and cannot be manipulated for cherry-picking of the desired results. We're all human beings. It's advisable that somebody reviews our work. Also, ICEP 1, which stands for International Standard of Actuarial Practice 1, recommends that the actuarial services provided by an actuary are peer-reviewed. What does it mean by International Standard 1 peer review? The actuary should consider to what extent, if at all, it is appropriate for the report to be independently reviewed, in totality or by component, before the final report is delivered to the principal or distributed to the intended users. The purpose of peer review is to ensure the quality of the report with a process tailored to the complexity of the work and the specific environment in which the actuary works. So now we come to the polling question 3. Do you get your significant work peer reviewed? You have 30 seconds to answer.
We have the answers now. We have 67 out of 148 saying that they do have their work peer-reviewed, and we have 14 saying no. We have a large number of people not answering the question, but of those who have answered the question, the vast majority say that they have got their work peer-reviewed, so that's a very good answer, I think. and it's very encouraging. Back to you, Vladimir.
Indeed, but I have something to say regarding this, regarding the region. Actuaries working for companies in Eastern Europe that are part of insurance groups coming from European Union usually have their work reviewed by the group actuaries in the headquarters. The companies that are not part of international groups, there is often only one actuary, being the judge and the jury. The only peer review he or she can get is an annual audit by the external auditor. However, that's part of the external auditor's work. A requirement to consider peer review is set out in model actuarial standards, both in the international standard ISAP 1 and the European standard ISAP 1. And actuaries who cannot have it in their companies may consider asking for a senior qualified actuary from outside to review their work before submitting it to the board or to the regulator.
Thanks, Vladimir. Yes, peer review is clearly an important issue. ISAP 1, which is an actuarial standard that has been produced, a model actuarial standard that's been produced by the IAA to be used by member associations, that's your own national associations to which you belong. And many of these associations have now either adopted ISAP 1 or a version of it. So quite a lot of you will have be members of an association that does actually ask you to consider whether you should be doing a peer review. And it's quite a big step forward that we've had over the last few years across the world. Back to you, Vladimir.
The next question in the reserving process is interesting. Could it be that some significant changes in the company affected the reserving process? For example, the opening claim reserve may be increased or decreased based on an analysis of past claims, proving that reserves were constantly underestimated at claim opening. Also, due to some circumstances, the claims handling process has been changed due to faster or slower payment of claims in comparison with the previous dynamics. That needs to be taken into consideration and treated accordingly. The following query is related to the actuarial profession. Actuaries who are members of an actuarial association have a code of conduct to follow during the execution of their work. Following question 4 is regarding the code of conduct of the actuarial association you belong to. So please select all the options that apply to your case. You have 30 seconds. Can we have the following questions? Thanks.
We have the result now of the question. 54 of you say that the code of conduct is well seen. 47 say it's understood. And 32 would say that it was implemented. 7 of you have said none of the above, but quite a large number of you, 71, that's about half, haven't answered our questions. It would be great if you are able to answer the questions that we're putting to you so that we can all see what the general view is around the world. But it is perhaps understandable that the code of conduct is known about by a slightly larger number of people than those who understand it and that those who actually implement it. But the number implementing does seem to be a reasonable number of those who know about it, which perhaps isn't too bad a result. The code of conduct is key. If you belong to an association and that association is a member of the IAA, then the code of conduct is key to that association belonging to the IAA, because the code of conduct is thought of as being so important that everybody every actuary needs to not only know about it and understand it, but also put it into force. Okay. On that note, I'll hand you back to Vladimir.
Thanks, David. The actuarial profession is very young in this region. It should be explained to the attendees that most of the countries in the region have a socialist or communist past with a high form of centralization of power. In the heat of becoming less socialist or communist, these actuarial associations were established around 20 years ago. In some countries, the regulator issued laws and bylaws defining the rules or standards of the actuarial profession, trying to give a legal weight to some of the provisions of the code of conduct or certain actuarial standards. Also, the regulator is the regulator who licenses the actuaries and not the association. As long as the regulators decide who is an actuary, regulations will supersede the professional standards. Therefore, actuaries in general are more concerned with the statutory requirements and pay less attention to the actuarial standards of actuarial profession. They care about their day-to-day mostly to please the regulator and not the profession. Nevertheless, members of the full member associations are required to consider the code of conduct as an important guideline in the performance of their duties. So back to you, David.
Yes, thank you, Vladimir. Yes, some actuaries in parts of the world do see clearly the regulator, the local regulator, as being the important organization, and so it is, but they also have a duty to their own association, and it would be hoped that there aren't any places where the code of conduct was in conflict with what the regulator requires. But clearly, if that is the case, then that's something which you would want to perhaps take up with your local association to try and get that conflict, if there is one, sorted out, and the regulator and the association be more in line. But it isn't sufficient just to follow what the regulator says. You, as professionals, need to pay attention to the code of conduct that's set out by your association, in line with the standard approach that the IAA has to social conduct. Vladimir, some more questions from you.
Thanks, David. Let's continue now with some questions related to the actuarial profession. The next question is quite interesting. Before we open the poll question, we need to clarify the term client. In the sense of the profession, a client is a natural or legal person to whom the services of the actuary are intended and who naturally pays for the services of the actuary, which is a quite important remark. So we come to the poll question number 5. If you are the appointed actuary of an insurance company, who is your client? 30 seconds to answer again.
We have the results now. The actuary's client is seen as the senior management by 33 out of 146. But again, we have about half of the members not answering. So 33 out of about 70 think that it would be the senior management. 57 out of that number think it's the board of governors, and 26 the supervisor. Interesting. The question is maybe who pays the fees of the actuary, and it may well be something to think about regarding which of you think that your client is the person who pays your fees. Back to you, Vladimir. Could we ask Carla, is it possible to extend the period for answering questions? Somebody's made a comment that not enough time is given. We seem to have only about 18 seconds. Is that possible?
I'll do my best to extend.
Thank you.
Okay, let's continue. In some countries, appointed actuaries may find themselves questioning who their client is. It is because their duties as appointed actuaries are defined in the legislation and they have some obligations towards the supervisor bypassing their clients. Though, on the other hand, they get paid by the insurance companies. It is important to know that the company that pays them is primarily their client, and the supervisor is informed later as requested by the legislation. David, could you add something to this?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, it's the question of the role of the appointed actuary, which has got certain duties towards the supervisor. It's important to keep that in mind, but of course, the client who is actually paying for the work has to be borne in mind as well. So the actuary may find that the audience for his work is more than one body, and it's important to keep all of those bodies in mind. Thank you, Vladimir.
Actuarial standards, local and regional, direct our actuarial services provided to our clients. It should also be mentioned in the actuarial report submitted to our clients. Therefore, a polling question follows regarding the actuarial standards to find out which actuarial standards you use in your daily work with your employer. So the polling question 6 asks which actuarial standards are applicable for your work. You have 30 seconds to answer this question, so please select all the options that apply to you. As usual, David will summarize and comment the results.
And we have a longer period this time for your answers, 27 seconds in fact.
Also, I would like to remind people that once they select their option, they have to select also submit so we can see your answers.
Yes, the submit button is in the bottom right-hand corner. Okay, well, we have a range of answers here. Those that are locally adopted by ISAP 1 represents 17 out of about 80 people who have answered. A locally adopted ESAPs 1, 2, and 3, that's obviously for Europeans who are participating, that's 37. About 80, so just under half would be using locally adopted European model standards. Ones defined by the association and by the local regulator both account for about 50 out of the 80 people. So there's clearly a mixture of standards, those that are used, that are set by the regulator, and those that are set by the association. So we have a range of answers, but it's quite interesting to see that the influence of the model standards from the IAA and from the European AAE are both being used reasonably widely now. Thank you. Back to you, Vladimir.
As I already mentioned before regarding the code of conduct, the actuaries in the region are primarily concerned with the rules and standards defined by the insurance supervisor, because it is the supervisor and not the association in these countries who decides on who is a qualified actuary. So, with the last question on this slide, we complete the reserving process. It is worth noting that the reserving process does not end with producing the reserve estimate. After calculating the reserve figure, the results should be documented and communicated to the bodies with great care, and make sure that the professionalism provisions from the Code of Conduct and other standards are followed and respected. Next slide talks about the various kinds of conflicts interfering during the decision making regarding the adequate level of reserves. First, let's look at the conflicts relating to the timescale in evaluating insurance operations. We concentrate mostly on short-term profits, satisfying some shareholders, or are we also concerned in the long-term viability of the insurance company? Are these opposed visions well balanced while including on the level of reserves? Secondly, the appointed actuary's bonus may depend upon satisfying his or her client. Does the actuary prefer his bonus above the long-term viability of the company? Then thirdly, while being confronted with a bullying finance director, how do you manage your day-to-day relations with this person without being fired or having constant fights? One day, you may even not go to the office to avoid him. Development of soft skills may be appropriate to manage strong personalities.
Before we go on to the next polling question, Vladimir, perhaps we could ask if anyone has any views or experiences of being confronted with a bullying finance director, and obviously these will be anonymous. If you wanted to put something on the Q&A, that would be very helpful to us. But in the meantime, we move on to the polling.
Next polling question is about adoption of ISAP. Do you think that the adoption of ISAP will help the bullying situation?
Don't forget to press the submit button on the bottom right-hand corner when you've completed the question. Well, we have 61 out of about 80 saying they think that it has helped. Yes, 61 out of about 90, and 30 say no. So it's quite interesting that you think that it's going to help. I guess the reason why it might be helping will be that if there is an international standard around, then people will feel that they can say to the boss, here, this is what's required of actuaries. You have to pay attention to what actuaries have to say, and that may help with a bullying situation. So it's very helpful that is the view that people have. Moving back to you, Vladimir.
Thanks, David. Finally, there may be other conflicts, such as when the actuary who calculates the reserves also reviews or gives an opinion on the reserves. It is not very comfortable either, as we all remain human beings, and the question is, can we really give an unbiased view on our own work? In practice, the external auditor will also give a second opinion on the reserves, so this may reduce the risk of this actuary doing both calculating and reviewing. The following slide is about the risks involved in evaluating the reserves. First, there is the uncertainty. But in the end, what is uncertainty? Reserves are typically calculated using a deterministic approach. Using various scenarios of assumptions, there will be different ranges of outcome. Other risks may influence the evaluation of reserves. These are linked to the economy, society, different target market, changing jurisdictions, regulations, even politics. There are many examples connected to these risks, like unstable markets with volatile inflation, usage of smartphones by drivers and pedestrians, insuring less private vehicles but concentrating on heavy trucks and buses, different amounts awarded in courts in different parts of the jurisdiction, liberalizing the MTPL tariff, the political risk that can be behind some of the risks already mentioned. Now we come to the last slide, where we're gathering various questions arising from our case study. First one, have you given all the necessary information to assure the finance director that that is the right level of reserves? Many times, actuaries take their knowledge and expertise for granted and assume that it is known to everyone, so that they don't dedicate enough time and patience to communicate all the information. Again, it should be emphasized that the detailed documentation of actuaries' work prevent many misunderstandings due to insufficient communication. Some years ago, and it may continue to the present, there was an IFOA working party on the Good Actuarial Report. Search of the IFOA website may provide interesting reading for the attendees. Then the second question, could you have possibly made a mistake in the calculations due to lack of information from the management? The management often doesn't think that it is important to inform the actuary about different operational decisions, because in their view, that does not concern the actuary. However, the management should be aware that everything that is being done in an insurance company, be it in the underwriting, claims, or administrative areas, may impact the actuarial work in a certain manner. Then, what should be done to protect actuaries' reputation if the lower reserve level is accepted? Subsequent events show that the initial proposed levels were the appropriate ones. The actuary accepted the suggestion by the management. He or she needs to document and disclose in the original report about which risks exist, that the outcome will not be the same as the one desired by the finance director. If you see that something that you believe is wrong, you may feel the need to draw attention to it. There are two steps: speaking up to those in the company, or whistleblowing, referring it to the regulator. So the next poll question and the last poll question in this webinar will be about speaking up or whistleblowing options. The question to you is, have you ever considered to speak up or whistleblow? Again, you have 30 seconds to answer to this question.
Okay, I hope you can hear me better now. Vladimir, can you hear me? Vladimir, can you hear me now?
I just muted Vladimir, so you can have more audio.
Okay, the results show that 62 out of about 100 people are saying that you would speak up, or you have spoken up, and that only 7 have actually whistleblown. I think I will revert to my original speaking because there's too much of an echo on this line. Back to you, Vladimir.
Yes, Due to general low level of implementation of good corporate governance, the speaking up concept may not be very welcome in the organizations from the region. In any case, if an actuary decides to speak up, he or she should do it with the shareholders' representatives, which is the supervisory board, the board, or the non-executive directors. If the supervisory board is not set in a proper way and does not perform up to the level it is expected to by the good corporate governance principles, the actuary should consider whistleblowing to the supervisory agency as the last resort. So we come to the last question on this slide, and it is: the actuary refuses to move slightly on his estimates and disagree with the finance director. Is his job at risk? There are several cases in the region where appointed actuaries lost their jobs or got their salaries reduced due to their disagreements with the finance directors over the adequacy of their estimates or over disclosing issues that the management did not want to talk about. However, this is in direct conflict with the paragraph 8312 of the Insurance Core Principle 8, where it is stated that the control functions should be free to report to senior management or management board, the board, which is the supervisory board, on any irregularities or possible breaches disclosed by its investigations without fear of retaliation or disfavor from management. Therefore, the supervisory agencies should react and investigate any case in which the appointed actuary is replaced without a sound explanation. So, back to you, David.
Okay, thank you. Now there's an opportunity to submit any comments and questions that you have. We have 2 points that have been made. I hope you're maybe able to see that. If you open the chat facility on the right side of your screen, you'll be able to see points that have been made there. One of them is that in connection with the case study, the situation happens in the case study, in the view of this participant, in companies that have a weak position of their actuarial function and their actuarial department. And this participant thinks it's mainly due to our own self-presentation, which is rather poor within the companies, and so we can't communicate outputs clearly and simply. Do you have a view about that, Vladimir, as to whether our own presentation of the issues within the companies is not good enough, and that's giving rise to some of these problems?
I agree with that standing to some extent, because especially in the Eastern European countries, where the regulation supersedes the standards of the actuarial profession, and the corporate governance is not up to the level it is expected to be, then the actuaries can have problems even with if they have the best soft skills in order to transmit the message. Sometimes that is not even enough because people who run the companies usually have their own ideas about how it should be.
Okay. Another comment here is in connection with ISAP 1. It says here, ISAP 1 helps only if it's understood where the flexibility begins and ends. And that's always a bit subjective. So do you have any thoughts about ISAP 1 and the flexibility there and the subjectiveness of that? I think the commentator believes that the red lines are important.
Mm, Definitely. Well, here we have just in the uh, associations of the region, the ISAPs were recently introduced, and I must say that the associations uh, don't have enough experience in putting them into practice. So I couldn't comment too much on this.
One other comment that we have had is someone saying that, well, that commentator has actually had pressure from the finance director to change the reserves or to make them weaker. That finance director nevertheless said to the actuary, I'm telling you, it's your job to tell me when to stop and to stop pushing you to make them smaller, which is an interesting observation as to the responsibility that actuaries have. Any thoughts on that one, Vladimir?
Well, it is very important in what kind of jurisdiction, in what kind of regulatory regime that actuary works, and what are his options. Because if he works in a risk-based supervisory regime, then a regulatory regime, sorry, then he has more means um, to solve the things correctly. But if he's in a regime where everything is defined in the regulations, then he doesn't have much choice. Yes. So the associations that are in the countries um, where everything is defined in the regulations should work hard to promote the profession and to make the association an equal partner to the regulatory bodies in order to impose its way of professionalism in dealing with these situations.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions coming in on the Q&A at present. So I just would like perhaps to draw matters to a conclusion. Are there any concluding comments, Vladimir, that have occurred to you during the presentation that you want to make?
Well, in the end, I would like to pose a question to the audience. If they found this webinar useful, what other professionalism topics and case studies you think are important for the region you would like to see developed in the future? So if you could, if you have some ideas, just place them in the Q&A section, and so that we have some more ideas about what's interesting for the region.
Okay, Carla, I think maybe we could keep the Q&A open for a few minutes after the end of the webinar, so that people can still put in their comments. This is very much our first attempt. Some of the comments that have come through are about the polling questions and how they might be better phrased, and so thank you for those. We will take account of those for anything we do in the future. And any other further comments you want to make about the nature of the presentation and how it could be improved would be very welcome indeed. I think maybe we move on to the last slide, Vladimir, which is just a thank you slide, which is to say thank you to everyone that's been involved with this. The greatest amount of thanks, I think, goes to Vladimir, who's written the bulk of the presentation. But there's also been behind us a team that has worked with us and helped us to make the webinar better than it would have been otherwise. But in particular, I'd like to thank all of you, those of you that have submitted comments. Thank you in particular, but thank you to all of you for participating and making the webinar the success it has been. We've had a very large number of participants, not as many as we had thought, but a good number anyway. So thank you very much, and we'll keep the Q&A open for a little bit longer so that you can submit your comments. Thank you, and thank you, Vladimir.
To add to this, I would like to say I'm sending right now my email address, carla.zuniga@actuaries.org, so participants can also send topic ideas directly to my email. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carla.